Hello again. Now that we've gotten pretty much the speakers as done as they were able to get before we headed to Utah, it's time to spend a couple of days and work on the thrones. So we've been wanting to build log furniture for our home for quite some time, and we had actually purchased some of the tools to do so a while ago, and just never had a place to actually work on them. So now that we have a place, it's time to kind of set them up, and that's what Emily's starting to work on, and I'm uh, gathering those tools and making sure we have everything that we need to be able to actually use them. I decided to try and see if I could get a corded light, and so we didn't have to worry about the batteries on the DeWalt lights, but that was clearly not sufficient. There's like this reflective piece in there that blocks half of it, and then without that it's not bright enough and it's two directional. I don't know. I ended up giving up and just going back to the DeWalt work light. They worked pretty well. But I also knew I would be using the drill and the circular, the chop saw, and a lot of other tools, so I made a little bit more convenient of a method for power supplies. So these tools that we're putting together now are log clamps, and everything is provided by, or not provided by, but bought from a company called Lumberjack Tools, and they specialize in log, mortise, and tenon tools, and various things to help along with those, and these clamps are part of them. Turns out we actually accidentally ordered an extra one, so we have two of the smaller clamp and one of the larger clamp. The smaller one does like half-inch up to 4.5 inches, I think, and the larger one does like 1 inch up to 8 inches, and they actually worked really well. They're a little bit finicky, I guess, to use. You just have to make sure that the top clamp is at a downward angle, and you just have to take a little bit of time putting the log in to make sure everything is properly secure. But they actually worked extremely well for what we needed, and it made drilling the mortises into the logs and drilling the tenons on the ends of the logs much easier. I do have to secure a couple of nuts on them. I couldn't find my Allen wrench set, which is what I was just wandering around trying to find. I have like 3 of them in various places, and I don't know, I just have to look for something else so that I'll find them. That's the way it always works. But we ended up getting them put together and using the plywood frame as both a table and as a spot to secure those. That actually worked really well. I ended up securing, using some screws to secure the chop saw in place as well, and it made a really nice little workspace. It's interesting to do things in a small space like this, because we were basically confined to a 16 by 8 work area, and feeling how cramped things were gave a really good idea of how big a workspace I need to have for this stuff going forward. So when we eventually get to a point where we're going to do this on a much more common basis, I need like a 20 by 30 space to be able to do the work. So we have a spot where we can set things up, and we have a spot where we can do the mortises, and a spot to do the tenons, and we can just have a nice workflow, have plenty of work surfaces that preferably don't have giant gaps in between the braces so that logs fall through. But overall, it worked, and it did exactly what we needed, and was definitely a very good thing, and we were very happy to have the space in here. So we're just getting those secured. And this particular project, I think Emily might have actually done more work than I did. I did all of the tenon and mortise cutting. I did all of the planning, and Emily helped with a lot of that. She also helped by doing all of the sanding. She did all of the bark removal. And she did a lot of the finish sculpting of the throne backs. So this was definitely a combined effort, and her help was invaluable to make sure that we got it done. And so these are alder logs that we had. We have a spot. Emily calls it her secret garden now, and we had originally planned on building like a little 12 by 16 cabin there, and it was going to be our little off-grid cabin. It was going to be where we just do whatever it is that we need to do. We were going to build a couple of lean-tos and enclose those so they were reasonably protected. That was where we were going to. The original thought was we were going to put my office up there, put a bedroom up there, and build like a little portable kitchen kind of a thing, so that we could just get out of the camper trailer. And I got the tractor up there. We picked a spot that we liked for it. We got access to it. We cleared everything. That's where my nightmare oak stump was hiding, and it took me like 12 hours to finally get the stupid stump out of the way, because I had to keep rearranging, and I didn't want to just like totally dig into the hillside. But every time I would try to pull it out, I would have to dig further and further and dig more and more. And this is one of those things where having the right tool for the right job, or having the right tool for the job, is a very critical thing. This is where we actually decided that we needed an actual excavator, and probably in the 8 to 12,000 pound range. We need a pretty good sized excavator to do some of the work that we need to do. Because if we'd have had that tool, especially if it was like in the 10 or 12,000 pound range, because then we could have gotten a 6-way blade on the front of it to do grading work, which would make a huge difference. But if we'd have had that, I'd have been able to dig around it with only moving a couple of times, and then it would have also had the weight and power to break the stump. As it was, even after I ended up digging all the way around it, about 6.5, 7 feet in some places, and actually wide enough that I could get the tractor between the stump and the hillside on the north side of the stump and on the west side of the stump. So I moved an awful lot of dirt to get to that that point, because that's just how much I had to move to be able to keep reaching spots to dig. And I kept digging down and digging down and digging as much as I could under it, and it just had a major, huge taproot. But in addition to that, it had hundreds of roots. The oak roots just go everywhere, and it was such a pain. And they weren't rotted at all. It was a Oregon oak, which is in the white oak family, or in the oak family, obviously, in the white oak varieties. And apparently, it just didn't rot. It got to the point where I was left with a probably 2.5 to 3 foot diameter section under the stump that I just couldn't scrape anymore with the backhoe. I tried using forks to kind of on the tractor to kind of stab at it and lift it. I tried using the bucket to try and push and pull it, and I finally gave up on trying. I was just done with it, and I said, you know what, I'm going to just burn through a chain on my chainsaw. And I went and put a brand new chain on the saw and just plunged it into the dirt and wiggled it around, and I got 3 good plunges before the chain was so dull I couldn't do anything with it anymore. And then I grabbed chains and wrapped them around it and just pulled, and finally got the stump to break, and that is now sitting partially buried in our chicken run. And it actually has a shoot coming up from those roots, because it wasn't rotted at all. So we're actually hoping that it will continue to grow and that we'll actually get a good oak tree out of it. That would be pretty awesome. But anyway, so the area that was cleared there was covered in a bunch of 10 to 15-year-old alders that were all in the 30 to 50 foot range, and somewhere in the 4 to 6 inch diameter size at breast height. And so we pulled all of those out, and every time I'd pull one out, I would cut them into 8 to 12 foot pieces is what I was trying for, or logs. And I knew I wanted to build furniture out of them, so they all got piled and stacked off to the side kind of, and they did dry fairly well for the most part, but I didn't have anything covering them, so they got rained on all winter, and they didn't dry as well as they should have. Additionally, we didn't actually remove the bark, which in hindsight was a huge problem. We would have saved ourselves a ton of time if we'd have removed the bark right after we took them down, and then had somewhere to put them so that they would be protected from the rain. They probably would have been a lot drier. As a result of this, we are giving these to Kylie as her wedding gift, and unfortunately we told her we do have to bring them back to Washington, because there's obviously the chance that there might be a bug in them, and we don't want to be that guy who ends up causing an outbreak or causing an invasive species to spread from one area to another. So when we get a kiln built, we will put these in there, and we'll get them kiln dried, and then we can take them back on our next trip after that, and leave them there for her. What you're seeing is an attempt to try and circumvent the need for a bigger drill. Now, the drill that we ordered was the largest that we could find in a 1-speed mixing drill. The Lumberjack Tools recommends a Makita drill that is their not Makita, Milwaukee, the red guys. But the model that they recommend isn't made anymore, so we actually couldn't find it anywhere. The one place I did find, they knew it was discontinued and knew apparently it was still a really popular drill, and it was like a $210 drill brand new, and they were asking like $600 for it. So I said, yeah, no, we're not doing that. So this is the most powerful drill that I could find, aside from that one. And it's doing the job for the most part, but because the the logs are still somewhat wet, it is struggling. And so I marked where the tenon was going to be, and I'm using the circular saw to kind of cut notches in it, and then the hand saw to cut the depth of the tenon, or the shoulder of the tenon, and then I can use the drill to finish that. I did try and adjust the blade depth on the tenon cutters, and tried a little bit more aggressively, and actually found that a little bit less aggressive worked, so I kind of reset them to where they were originally. And it ended up being that just removing some of that material with a saw ended up being the best way to go about doing it. And I only had to do this on like the thickest of the logs, so the ones where I'm using the leg pieces and the main braces. Once I got into some of the like smaller pieces, I didn't have to worry about that. I probably could have also gotten a better result had I done a 3-inch tenon instead of the 2-inch. That probably would have helped. But on the logs where they had actually dried a fair amount, I didn't have any problems at all. The other challenge with the logs being damp, is that the cutter left very rough cuts. So that's definitely an advantage to having all of the logs as dry as possible. They'll cut them smoother. But they did work, and worked great. We got a lot of compliments. These thrones ended up being both a photography point and a conversation starter. Most people who saw them were quite surprised, and I think I had at least 5 different people at different points say that I should be making these to sell. So who knows? We'll see. I definitely need a little bit more practice. The assembly didn't go as smoothly as I would like, and I think a lot of that is because I don't have any kind of center finding device for the logs. So that's something I'm going to either purchase or build. We'll see how hard that is to actually build, but you can see on these like slightly thinner pieces, for instance, that it tears through the log the way that it was supposed to. This was actually a fairly dry log too. The design was pretty straightforward. We had looked at a bunch of different pictures of log furniture and things like that. We looked at all kinds of pictures and sent texts and images back and forth with my daughter, and narrowed it down to a few that she really liked. And I don't want to put a photo up here because I'm not affiliated with them, and I don't want to break any of their copyrights. But if you were to look up a company or a website called Romancing the Woods, and look up their New World Throne, that's where a large portion of the inspiration for these thrones came from, with a few other things mixed in. And they have a few different options, actually. That it's a pretty cool website. If I was going to buy something, I would definitely not hesitate to buy from them based on the quality of the stuff they have on their website. But this was a pretty fun challenge, and you can see here I'm trying to make sure that everything is comfortable. So I'm testing, sitting on different things, or and every time I would start to put the pieces together, I would sit in it to make sure that things were actually comfortable and make adjustments as I felt like I needed. And they actually went together pretty well. I did run into a slight challenge where one of the thrones ended up being slightly skinnier than the other, which was kind of a interesting mistake, I guess. It wasn't uncomfortable or a problem. It just ended up being like, if I sit in it, I'm a big guy, and it was tight for me to sit in. But once I was sitting in it, it was actually still just as comfortable as the other one. So that wasn't too big of an issue. But you can see here with these some slightly thicker logs, I'm kind of struggling to get that tenon again. And some of them went just fine. So I think the biggest challenge I think really was the moisture content. But this was something I've never actually done before, and it was a really interesting project. It was definitely something I'm glad we were interested in enough that when this is one of the things that was requested specifically for the wedding, that I was able to say, hey, well, as it turns out, we have those tools already. We plan on doing this, so sure, let's do that. Yeah, it was a pretty cool thing. I'll have to, once these are dry, I'll have to do some kind of fairly heavy duty protective coating, because the red alder isn't very weather resistant, so I'll have to put some like standoff feet on them to help keep the logs out of the moisture when they're sitting on the ground, as well as like probably an epoxy coating, and then treat the epoxy with a UV protective like polyurethane or something, so that they get the most life out of them as possible. That would definitely be an advantage going forward, knowing, being able to have access to some like, cedar and white oak and things like that. We do have some white oak that we've had to unfortunately take down, and I will definitely be harvesting as much of those branches and things as possible. But this is where I'm ending up for today, for this date. Got pretty far, so was very happy with the progress. And for the first little while, I was pretty frustrated and struggling, thinking that I was not going to be able to get these done in time. But once I figured out the lumber issue, I was able to get those tenons going pretty good. So the next video we'll get some assembly done. So thank you as always for watching. God bless you and yours, and stay safe out there.